Hello, I'm Evely and I will tell you one story. Let's go. Evan always believed he belonged, yet something was dreadfully amiss, a slow, creeping dissolution of his very existence. From his earliest recollections, he sensed that the world around him was gradually erasing his presence. It began with minor, unsettling lapses, a name unspoken in conversation, a smile that never reached an eye, a nod that felt more like an empty gesture. In the dim light of his cramped, worn apartment on the outskirts of a decaying town, he discovered that every memory he once held dear was now slipping away, leaving behind only echoes of a past that seemed less and less real. It was as if he were a ghost wandering through a realm where he was never meant to be. One overcast morning, as a pallid sun fought its way through thick, oppressive clouds, Evan caught sight of his reflection in a fogged-up mirror. The man staring back bore the traces of despair and profound loneliness. His eyes, once alive with hope, now shimmered with the burden of endless isolation. Strangely, the reflection seemed to waver, as though the very idea of his being was dissolving in the glass. When he ventured out into the rain-soaked streets, the bustling passers-by paid him no heed. Their hurried steps and vacant stares confirmed his worst fear. In this world, he was invisible, forgotten by those he once called friends and neighbors. The laughter and conversation that should have embraced him were now absent, erased from the collective memory of everyone around him. Days bled relentlessly into nights, each moment a descent into a personal nightmare. The silence in his apartment grew stifling, filled with unspoken regrets and memories that weren't his. Faded photographs on the walls, relics of happier times, now served as cruel reminders of what had been lost. A birthday celebration without him, a dinner table missing one chair, the vacant spaces in the laughter of old friends, all were fragments of a life that had been meticulously scrubbed clean from the tapestry of collective experience. One rainy evening, after aimlessly wandering through deserted alleyways, Evan sought refuge in a small, familiar cafe. Yet inside, the establishment was shrouded in an eerie stillness. Patrons sat like statues, their eyes fixed on the shifting shadows outside. When he tried to speak, his words caught in his throat as if an unseen force had rendered him mute. With a heavy heart, he slipped away, the echo of his solitary footsteps his only companion. That very night, a series of bizarre events shattered what little normalcy remained. In his cluttered living room, the ancient clock ticked erratically, its hands jerking and stuttering as though uncertain of time itself. Shadows on the peeling walls twisted into grotesque figures, mimicking long-forgotten faces with silent accusations. Amid this eerie spectacle, a cryptic inscription appeared on the battered surface of his old oak table. "They remember, but you remain lost." These words, not of his own writing, sent icy tendrils of terror spiraling down his spine. Who were they, and why had they condemned him to oblivion? The message loomed like a prophecy, heralding a fate more terrible than mere loneliness. Driven by desperation, Evan began to document every inexplicable occurrence. He scrawled notes on scraps of paper, observations of fleeting shadows, murmurs in the dark, and reflections in windows that did not belong to him. Yet even his journal betrayed him. Passages he did not recall writing appeared as though his own hand had been taken over by an otherworldly presence. The ink on the pages seemed to pulse and throb, absorbing fragments of his fading memories. With mounting horror, he realized that the record of his life was no longer under his control. It was being rewritten by forces he could neither understand nor resist. In a final bid for answers, Evan ventured into the town's abandoned archives, a decrepit building rumored to safeguard the secrets of those long consigned to oblivion. Inside, among crumbling ledgers and brittle diaries, he uncovered records of people whose names had been meticulously expunged from every document. These were lives once filled with joy and sorrow, now reduced to mere footnotes in a history that no longer acknowledged their existence. To his mounting despair, Evan's own name was missing from every record, a deliberate erasure that chilled him to the bone. His heart pounded in his ears as he pieced together the horrifying pattern. The lives of the once cherished were systematically obliterated, and he was at the center of the sinister purge. Wading through the dusty corridors of the archive, he suddenly became aware of a presence, a soft, shuffling sound that echoed in the stillness. Spinning around, he saw a shadowy figure emerging from behind a stack of forgotten tomes. The figure's features were obscured by a tattered hood, yet its eyes, gleaming with an unsettling luminescence, fixed upon him with an intensity that defied explanation. In a voice that resonated like dry leaves rustling in a forgotten cemetery, the stranger intoned, "You are the void they left behind." That single, cryptic sentence shattered the fragile barrier between his mind and the encroaching madness, revealing that his existence was no mere accident but a deliberate omission orchestrated by a force as old as time itself. As the rain hammered the streets outside and the ancient clock tower in the distance stood frozen at midnight, Evan felt the full weight of his cursed fate. Every creak in the building, every gust of wind, whispered secrets of a destiny entwined with darkness. With trembling resolve, he left the archives and trudged toward the looming tower, a silent monolith that seemed to guard the answers to the mystery of his erasure. In that moment, the night itself appeared to come alive, each shadow a harbinger of dread, each echo a reminder that he was not alone in his despair. Stepping through the shattered doorway of the clock tower, the atmosphere grew oppressively dense. The rain's relentless drumming on the ancient stones merged with the sound of his racing heartbeat. Here, in the bowels of a forsaken monument, Evan sensed that every secret of the forgotten was hidden. The tower's corridors stretched into darkness, punctuated only by the flickering flame of his lantern. With each tentative step, the air grew colder, as though the tower exhaled the frozen breath of lost souls. A palpable energy thrummed through the halls, a sinister promise that the truth, however terrible, awaited him just beyond the next shadowed corner. In the suffocating gloom, Evan's mind raced with questions. What dark power had conspired to erase him from memory? Who were the nameless figures that haunted his peripheral vision? And most chilling of all, what terrible purpose did his existence now serve in a world that had forsaken him? With these questions echoing in his thoughts, he advanced further into the unknown, unaware that the true horror was not lurking at the journey's end but had been entwined with his very soul all along. Evan's trembling steps carried him deeper into the heart of the ancient clock tower, where every creaking board and echoing drip of water spoke of unspoken secrets. The oppressive silence, broken only by his ragged breathing and the distant sound of gears long abandoned by time, seemed to throb with a malevolent pulse. He pressed forward, guided by a desperate need for truth, a truth that he feared might be more horrifying than his endless isolation. The narrow corridor opened into a vast, circular chamber. At its center lay an enormous, rusted mechanism half engulfed by creeping vines and the decay of forgotten years. Strange symbols, carved into the stone walls in a script that defied comprehension, glowed faintly in the flickering light of his lantern. Evan's eyes darted across the inscriptions as if trying to decipher their grim message. With each step, he felt as though unseen eyes scrutinized him, whispering warnings from the dark recesses of time. A sudden, bone-chilling gust of wind surged through the chamber, extinguishing his lantern in an instant. In the oppressive blackness, his heart thundered like a wild drumbeat. As he fumbled for a match, a soft, almost imperceptible hum began to fill the air, a resonance that seemed to emanate from the ancient machinery itself. When the light flickered back to life, Evan was confronted by a sight that would haunt him forever. On the far wall, where the stone had crumbled away, a series of ghostly figures emerged, their faces contorted in silent agony. They moved slowly, their eyes filled with an uncanny sorrow, as if they bore witness to an eternal penance. Panicked, Evan stumbled backwards until he collided with a cold, damp pillar. The figures advanced, their movements unnervingly deliberate. One spectral form, larger than the others, raised a translucent hand in a gesture that was both pleading and accusing. "Remember us," it murmured, its voice echoing in the vast emptiness, "for we are the forgotten, as are you." The words reverberated through his skull, igniting memories of laughter, love, and loss, all of which had been cruelly expunged from his world. Their sorrow seemed to merge with his own despair, creating a dissonant symphony of regret and terror. Struggling to regain his composure, Evan pressed on through a narrow archway that beckoned him deeper into the labyrinthine depths of the tower. The corridor beyond was lined with mirrors that reflected not only his own haunted visage, but also fleeting images of faces he could not place, faces of strangers, of friends, of loved ones he had once known. Each reflection bore a subtle distortion, as if time itself were warping their features into grotesque parodies of humanity. He could not tell if these were memories resurrected or mere phantoms conjured by his fraying mind. At the corridor's end, a heavy oak door stood ajar, revealing a dim, candlelit chamber beyond. Reluctantly, Evan stepped inside. The room was an eerie sanctum filled with old tomes and scattered artifacts that radiated an aura of forbidden knowledge. In the center of the room lay an ornate desk, upon which sat an ancient ledger bound in cracked leather. Trembling, he opened the ledger and discovered pages upon pages of names that had been erased from every record, names of those who, like him, were left to wander in the void. His own name was inscribed in the faded script, alongside cryptic symbols that pulsed with a life of their own. As he scanned the ledger, the temperature in the room plummeted and a heavy silence fell. A distant, rhythmic tapping began, like the slow, deliberate beating of a drum. The sound grew louder, drawing him toward a narrow staircase that spiraled downward into utter darkness. With each step he took, the tapping synchronized with his heartbeat, instilling a sense of inevitable dread. At the bottom of the stairs, the corridor opened into an expansive underground hall. Here, the walls were covered in murals depicting unspeakable rites and spectral figures locked in eternal torment. Every stroke of the ancient paint seemed to pulse with a malignant energy, as if the very history of forgotten souls was being relived in a grotesque dance of despair. In the center of the hall, atop a raised dais, stood a monolithic altar draped in decaying cloth. Flickering candles cast erratic shadows across its surface, revealing a singular, blood-red emblem, a sigil that resonated with a dark, primordial power. Evan's mind reeled with fragmented visions, a gathering of hooded figures chanting in a forgotten tongue, the merging of life and oblivion, and a promise that his erasure was part of an age-old ritual. The realization struck him with crushing force. His existence was not an accident but a deliberate sacrifice to feed the insatiable hunger of an ancient order, a dark covenant forged in the depths of human memory and despair. A sudden crash echoed through the hall as the altar began to tremble violently. The red sigil blazed with a searing light, and from the depths of the altar emerged a swirling vortex of shadows. Within its churning darkness, faces formed, faces of those long erased, their mournful eyes pleading for recognition. The vortex spoke in a cacophony of voices, each one an echo of the past: recall us, or be consumed by oblivion. The overwhelming force of their collective grief and fury threatened to tear apart the fabric of reality itself. Evan felt himself drawn toward the vortex as if an unseen force demanded his submission. With every fiber of his being screaming in terror and desperation, he realized that to resist was to risk vanishing completely, not only from the memories of others but from existence itself. In that harrowing moment, as the spectral voices swirled around him and the boundaries between past and present dissolved into a nightmare of shifting shadows, Evan faced the ultimate, terrifying choice: to embrace the darkness and reclaim the fragments of a stolen life, or to fade into the eternal void, forever forgotten. In the midst of that fateful decision, the ground trembled beneath him and the vortex's power intensified. The chamber seemed to shrink, the walls closing in with the weight of untold centuries of sorrow. And as the voices crescendoed into a deafening wail, Evan's fate hung in the balance, a fragile hope flickering against the overwhelming tide of oblivion. The truth, long hidden in the depths of darkness, was now unmistakable. The forgotten were not merely abandoned souls, but the very essence of a world consumed by its own relentless desire to erase what it could not bear to remember. Thank you very much, and see you all in the next video.